Simplify the following expression. The quantity 2x squared plus 3 times the quantity 2x minus 1. To simplify, we need to FOIL. The F in FOIL stands for first. So we're going to take the first term in our first binomial and multiply it times the first term in our second binomial. First and first. 2x squared times 2x. 2 times 2 is 4. X squared times x is x cubed. Next we do O, which stands for outer. So those are the two terms on the outside, which would be 2x squared and negative 1. So 2x squared times a negative 1 is negative 2x squared. Then our inner terms are the two terms on the inside, 3 times 2x, which is a positive 6x. And then finally, our last terms. So the last term in the first set of parentheses and the last term in the second set of parentheses. 3 times negative 1, which is negative 3. Then we'd want to look and see if we had any like terms to combine, and we don't. We have a cubic x term, a squared x term, an x term, and then just a constant. So that's our answer, which matches answer choice A. What is the slope of a line with point A, negative 15, negative 4, and point B, 15, 4? To find the slope of a line, slope, we use M for slope usually in math. The slope is the change in y divided by the change in x. And that triangle stands for change in. To find the change in y, you must subtract the y coordinates. So y2 minus y1. Likewise, to find the change in x, you must subtract the x coordinates in the same order. So x2 minus x1. Now where are these? Well, we were given two ordered pairs. So that means we have an x1 and a y1 and an x2 and a y2. So now we have the coordinates to substitute into our slope formula. So we'll start with y2, which is 4, minus y1, which is a negative 4, divided by x2, which was 15, minus x1, which is negative 15. And then we simplify. So we can add the inverse, and 4 plus 4 is 8, divided by, and again we can add the inverse, and 15 plus 15 is 30. Now finally we need to simplify our fraction. So we can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 30 divided by 2 is 15. So that means that our slope is 4/15, which is answer choice A. Solve for x in the following inequality. 4x plus 23 is greater than negative 3x minus 6. The first thing we want to do is get all of our x terms on the same side of the inequality. I'm going to do this by adding 3x to both sides. 4x plus 3x is 7x. Bring down the plus 23. And bring down the greater than sign. Negative 3x plus 3x, those are additive inverses, so they cancel. Bring down the negative 6. Next, we want to remove 23. The opposite of adding 23 is subtracting 23. So subtract 23 from both sides. Bring down the 7x. Plus 23 and negative 23 are additive inverses, so they cancel. Bring down the greater than sign. Negative 6 and negative 23, they have the same signs, they're both negative, which means our answer is negative, and we just add the numbers together. 23 plus 6 is 29, so it's negative 29. Finally, we have to divide both sides by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 1 times x is simply x. Bring down the greater than sign. And then the first thing I'll do is change this into a mixed number, since I can't actually divide negative 29 by 7 and get an integer. So 7 goes into negative 29 4 times. So it's negative 4. 4 times 7 is 28. So that means that there's 1 left over out of 7. So it's negative 4 and 1/7. X is greater than negative 4 and 1/7. Now if we look at the answers, you'll see that all the answers are in decimal form. And we can find out what 1/7 is as a decimal by dividing. So 7 doesn't go into 1, so we'll have to put a decimal here, which means bring a decimal to the top and add a 0 to it. 7 does go into 10 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. We subtract and we get 3. Add another 0, bring it down, and 7 goes into 30 4 times. 7 times 4 is 28. We subtract and we get 2. And we can stop there because all of our answers stop at the hundredths place as well. So we could write this as x is greater than negative 4 and 14 hundredths, which is answer choice A. If y equals 2, what is the value of the following expression? The quantity y to the 9th divided by y cubed times 2. The first thing we need to do is substitute 2 for y in our expression. So it becomes 2 to the 9th divided by 2 cubed, and that quantity times 2. And what I want to do is rewrite it. I prefer my fractions to be stacked, so I'm going to rewrite this as 2 to the 9th divided by 2 cubed times 2. When we're dividing and we have our bases the same, so in this case 2 is our base and it's the same, we simply subtract our exponents. 9 minus 3 is 6, so that's 2 to the 6th times 2. 2 to the 6th is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 times itself 6 times, and then times 2. So all we have to do is multiply all these 2's. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. And then times 2. 4 times 4 is 16. Times, and 4 times 2 is 8. So now I just need to multiply 16 times 8. 8 times 6 is 48. Carry the 4. 8 times 1 is 8. Plus 4 is 12. So it's 128. Evaluate the following expression if x equals 3. X to the 5th times x squared plus y to the 0 power equals. So first we need to substitute 3 for x. So we have 3 to the 5th times 3 squared plus anything raised to the 0 power, x, y, 10, 15, anything raised to the 0 power is 1. So that's plus 1. 3 to the 5th times 3 squared is really 3 to the 7th power plus 1. And 3 to the 7th power is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 3 times 3. 3 to the 5th times 3 squared plus 1. Okay, so we have a lot of 3's to multiply. 3 times 3 is 9 times 3 times 3 is 9 times 3 times 3 is 9 times 3 plus 1. 9 times 9 is 81 times, and then 9 times 3 is 27 plus 1. Okay, so now we need to multiply 81 times 27. 27 times 81, 1 times 7, 7, 1 times 2, 2, 0 placeholder. 8 times 7 is 56, so write the 6, carry the 5. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 5 is 21. So that's 7, we're adding these together, 8, 1, 2. So 2,187 plus 1, which is 2,188. So that's our answer. Answer D. (9x minus 3y plus 8xy minus 3). If x equals 10 and y equals negative 2, what is the value of this expression? First, we need to substitute. 9 times x, and we're replacing x with 10. So 9 times 10 minus 3 times y, and we're replacing y with negative 2. Plus 8 times x times y, so times 10 times negative 2. Minus 3. Now we need to follow our order of operations. First would be grouping symbols, but in this case there aren't any. Next would be exponents, and again we don't have any. So after that is multiplication and division, working from left to right. Starting at the left, we have 9 times 10, which is 90. Minus 3 times negative 2 plus 8 times 10 times negative 2 minus 3. Our next set of multiplication would be right here. So I'm going to bring down my 90 minus 3 times negative 2 is negative 6 plus 8 times 10 times negative 2 minus 3. Our next set of multiplication would be 8 times 10. So we have 90 minus a negative 6 plus 8 times 10 is 80 times negative 2 minus 3. Then we need to multiply 80 times negative 2. So we bring down our 90 minus negative 6 plus 80 times negative 2. A positive times a negative is a negative, so negative 160 minus 3. Now that we've taken care of all the multiplication, we're now going to work with addition and subtraction, again from left to right. So starting on the left, we're going to start with 90 minus a negative 6. Minus a negative, you can think of this like you're taking away a negative, which is the same as adding a positive, or you can add the inverse. So we have 90 plus 6, 96 plus negative 160 minus 3. Again, we've got to continue working from left to right. So next we have 96 plus negative 160. These two numbers have different signs. 96 is positive, while 160 is negative. Since they have different signs, we need to subtract them. So I'll do that off to the side. 160 minus 96. So to borrow from the 6, it becomes a 5. 10 minus 6 is 4. Now borrow from the 1, it becomes a 0. So I have 15 minus 9 is 6. So 160 minus 96 is 64. And it's going to be a negative 64 because 160, or negative 160, has a larger absolute value than 96 does. So negative 64 minus 3. And the last thing we do is subtract those numbers. So if you think about where you are in the number line, you're at way over here on the left at negative 64. And then you subtract 3, so you're moving more to the left. Your number's getting even smaller. So that's negative 67. Another way to think about it is you have 64 negatives and 3 negatives. That's a total of 67 negatives. And finally, even another way to think about it is you can change it to adding the inverse. So you have negative 64 plus negative 3. Either way, you're going to get negative 67. And that's answer A. X squared plus x equals 42. What is the value of x? We need to find what numbers or number will make this equation true. And there are a couple of different options we have, really. But I'm going to show you how to solve for x by factoring. If I want to factor, then the first thing I need to do is move this 42 to the other side. So subtract 42 from both sides of the equation. So I have x squared plus x minus 42 equals 42 minus 42 is 0. Now I'm ready to factor this trinomial. So I start with my parentheses for my two binomials. And I know that the first term of each parentheses is going to be an x, because x times x is x squared. And then to find my second terms, I need to find two numbers that multiply to give me negative 42 and add to give me a positive 1, because 1 is the coefficient of x. And the two numbers that would multiply to give me a negative 42 and add to give me a positive 1 are 7 and negative 6. 7 times negative 6 is negative 42, and 7 plus negative 6 is a positive 1. You can always check your factoring by foiling. X times x is x squared. X times negative 6 is negative 6x. Plus 7x is x, and 7 times negative 6 is negative 42. What I have now is that some number, and I don't know what it is because I don't know what x is yet, but some number times another number is 0. And the only way to multiply two numbers together and get 0 is if one of your numbers is 0. Which means either x plus 7 has to be 0, or x minus 6 has to be 0. And then we just solve for x in each equation. So to solve for x on this one, we need to subtract 7 from both sides, bring down the x, plus 7 minus 7 is 0, bring down your equals, 0 minus 7 is negative 7. Or, to solve for x in our second equation, we need to add 6 to both sides. Negative 6 plus 6 is 0, so x equals 0 plus 6 is 6, which means x is negative 7, or it is 6, and that's answer C. In the following inequality, solve for x. Negative 4x plus 8 is greater than or equal to 48. To solve for x, we need to get x alone, which means undoing the operations that are being done to x currently. And that is negative 4 times x and plus 8. So we'll start by getting rid of the plus 8. And we can get rid of it by doing the exact opposite of adding 8, subtracting 8. And if we subtract 8 from the left side of our inequality symbol, then we must also subtract 8 from the right side to keep it even. So we bring down our negative 4x. A positive 8 minus 8 is 0, is greater than or equal to 48 minus 8 is 40. We're almost done. Now we need to undo negative 4 times x. And the opposite of multiplying by a negative 4 is dividing by a negative 4. Now with inequalities, there is a special rule you have to remember. And that is, if you divide both sides by a negative number, or you multiply both sides by a negative number, you have to flip the sign. So now instead of greater than or equal to, our sign is now a less than or equal to sign. And again, that's because we divided both sides by a negative number. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1, and 1 times x is x. 40 divided by negative 4, a positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 40 divided by 4 is 10. So x is less than or equal to negative 10. Answer D. The quantity y plus 10 squared minus 625 equals 0. Solve for y. The first thing we want to do is add 625 to both sides, because doing that is going to help us get y alone and thus solve for it. So we bring down our quantity y plus 10 squared. Negative 625 plus 625 is 0, so that just cancels out. And that equals 0 plus 625, which is 625. Well, then we want to get rid of this squared because our y is kind of locked in those parentheses. So to unlock them, we want to do the opposite of squaring, which is square rooting. So we square root both sides. And the square root and the square undo each other. They're the exact opposites of each other. So they cancel each other out, and we're just left with y plus 10 equals, and when I take the square root of 625, I get plus or minus 25. And that's because a positive 25 squared would give me 625, but also a negative 25 squared would give me 625. So we really have two answers there. So we write it with a plus or minus. And finally, to solve for y, we need to subtract 10 from both sides. So we have y plus 10 minus 10 is 0, so equals negative 10 plus or minus 25. We have two answers, and to find them, we just need to simplify. So we have y equals negative 10 plus 25, and y equals negative 10 minus 25. All I did was separate the plus or the minus into two separate expressions. Negative 10 plus 25 is 15. while negative 10 minus 25 is negative 35. So our solutions are that y is 15 or negative 35, which is answer D. If a circle has a diameter of 12 centimeters, what is its area? The formula for area of a circle is pi times radius squared. We need to know what the radius of our circle is. We're given diameter, which is 12 centimeters. The diameter is twice the radius, or the radius is half of the diameter. So half of 12 centimeters would be 6 centimeters. So that means our radius is 6 centimeters. So we take our radius and substitute it into our formula. So area is pi times 6 centimeters squared. So the area is 6 squared, 36, pi centimeters squared. But if we look at our answers, none of our answers have pi in them. So that means that these answers are multiplied times pi. If you have a calculator, then you can just multiply 36 times pi in the calculator. But if you don't have a calculator, then pi is approximately 3 14/14. So take 3 14/14 and multiply that times 36. 6 times 4 is 24. Write the 4, carry the 2. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. 6 times 3 is 18. Get rid of that. Put a 0 placeholder to move on to the 3. 3 times 4 is 12. Write the 2 and carry the 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. And 3 times 3 is 9. Now add these up. 4 plus 0 is 4. 8 plus 2 is 10. Write the 0, carry the 1. 8, 9 plus 4 is 13. Write the 3, carry the 1. 9, 10, 11. Now, we have two numbers behind the decimal place in our numbers we multiplied together, so that means that our product must also have two numbers behind the decimal place. So our answer would be 113 centimeters squared, which is answer choice B. Which of the following lines is perpendicular to the line y equals negative 5x plus 27? Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. The slope in this equation is negative 5. Because this equation is in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b, where the m is the slope. So the slope of this line is negative 5. The slope of a line that's perpendicular to this line would have an opposite reciprocal slope. Opposite meaning opposite sign. So instead of negative, the slope will be positive. And then reciprocal, meaning simply to flip the fraction. So this is 5/1. The reciprocal would be 1/5. And again, it's a positive 1/5 because it has to be the opposite. So negative 5/1, the opposite reciprocal is positive 1/5. Looking at the answer choices, the only line with a slope of positive 1/5 is answer choice C. So that's the line that's perpendicular to our original line. If x divided by 3 plus 7 equals 35, what is the value of x? I'm going to start by writing this problem. X divided by 3 plus 7 equals 35. The first thing we want to do is subtract 7 from both sides, because a positive 7 and a negative 7 are additive inverses of each other and they cancel. So on the left side, we're left with x divided by 3. And on the right side, 35 minus 7 is 28. The opposite of dividing by 3 is multiplying by 3. So now we need to multiply both sides by 3. If you put this 3 over 1, now you're multiplying two fractions together, and the numerator and this denominator cross cancel, and you're simply left with x divided by 1, which is just x. So now if we determine what 28 times 3 is, we'll have our answer. 3 times 8 is 24, so write the 4 and carry the 2. And 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So that means that x is 84, which is answer C. Solve for y in the following inequality. Negative 2y is greater than or equal to 24 plus 6. So the first thing we want to do is combine these like terms, 24 plus 6. So we have negative 2y is greater than or equal to, and 24 plus 6 is 30. To solve for y, we need to divide by a negative 2. Since we have negative 2 times y, to undo that and get y alone, we divide both sides by negative 2. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1, and 1 times y leaves us with just y. Now, since we divided both sides by a negative, we have to flip our inequality sign. It was greater than or equal to, so now it's less than or equal to. And 30 divided by a negative 2, a positive number divided by a negative number is a negative number. And 30 divided by 2 is 15. That means that y is less than or equal to negative 15, which is answer choice C. Solve for y using the following system of equations. 2x minus 6y equals 12. Negative 6x plus 4y equals 42. There are several ways to solve a system of equations. What you need to keep in mind is that what you're doing is finding where these two lines intersect on a graph. So you can graph, that's one way to solve a system, is to graph both the lines and see where they intersect. And then in this case, just give the y coordinate. But you can also use substitution or elimination. And it's really your choice which one seems the best for the situation. In this situation, elimination seems to be the easiest choice. Because if I multiply this top equation by 3, I'll have a positive 6x term and a negative 6x term that will eliminate, thus allowing me to solve for y. So I'm going to multiply this entire top equation by 3. 3 times 2x is 6x. 3 times negative 6y is negative 18y. And 3 times 12 is 36. Now I'm just going to add these two equations together. Negative 6x and 6x is 0. They cancel. 14y and negative 18y is negative 4y. Bring down the equals. 42 plus 36 is 78. Then to solve for y, I need to divide both sides by negative 4. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1 times y is y equals a positive divided by a negative is a negative. And then I just need to go off to the side and divide 78 by 4. 4 goes into 7 one time. 4 times 1 is 4. You subtracting get 3. Bring down the 8. 4 goes into 38 9 times. 4 times 9 is 36. Subtract and you get 2. Add a decimal, and a 0. Bring it down. And 4 goes into 20 5 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract and you get a remainder of 0. So it's negative 19 and 5/10, which is answer A. If 2x squared equals negative 4x squared plus 216, what is the value of x? I'm going to start by rewriting this problem so I have a little more room to work with it. And if we're trying to solve for x, then we'll need to get all our x's together. So I'm going to add 4x squared to both sides so that way on the right-hand side it'll cancel because I have a negative 4x squared and a positive 4x squared, and those are additive inverses. Now on the left-hand side, 2x squared plus 4x squared is 6x squared. Bring down the equal sign and bring down 216. So this is 6 times x squared. So to get rid of this 6, we do the opposite of multiplying, which is dividing. Divide both sides by 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1, and 1 times x squared is simply x squared. So those 6's cancel. And that equals, and now we can take 216 and divide it by 6. 6 does not go into 2, but it does go into 21. And 6 times 3 is 18. It goes in 3 times and we get 18. 21 minus 18 is 3. We bring down the 6. And 6 goes into 36 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. So when we subtract, we get a 0 remainder. So that means that 216 divided by 6 is 36. So now we know what x squared equals, but we still haven't found what x equals. So to get x alone, we need to do the opposite of squaring x. And the opposite of squaring is to square root. So we square root both sides. The square root of x squared is simply x. And the square root of 36 is 6. So that means that x is 6. Answer C. Simplify the following expression. The quantity 2x minus 20 times the quantity 5x plus 10. To multiply these two binomials, we can use a method called FOIL. And FOIL stands for first, O stands for outer, I stands for inner, and L stands for last. So the F first means to multiply the first term in the first binomial times the first term in the second binomial. First times first. 2x times 5x. 2 times 5 is 10. And x times x is x squared. So it's 10x squared. The O again stands for outer. So that means to multiply the two outside terms. So 2x and 10 are the two terms on the outside, the outer terms. So 2x times 10, 2 times 10 is 20, 2x times 10 is 20x. I stands for inner. That means to multiply the two terms on the inside. So that would be this negative 20 times 5x. Negative 20 times 5x. A negative times a positive is a negative. 20 times 5x is 100x. Then finally, we multiplied the last terms together. So that means the last term in the first set of parentheses or in the first binomial times the last term in the second binomial. Last times last. So that's negative 20 times 10, which is negative 200. A negative times a positive is a negative. We're almost done. The last thing we need to do is combine these like terms right here. 20x and negative 100x. So it's really 20x minus 100x. Bring down the 10x squared first. And 20x minus 100x would be negative 80x. Then bring down the negative 200. So looking at our answer choices, looks like answer A would be the correct answer. A line passes through points A, negative 318, and B, 5, 2. What is the slope of the line? Well, there are a couple of different ways we can find slope. One would be to graph these 2 points on a coordinate plane and then count between the points the rise and the run. Because that's all that slope is, really. Slope is the change in your y values divided by the change in your x values. Or y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So this first point, this would be our first x and our first y. And then our second point here, B, would be our second x and our second y. And now that we've labeled, we just need to substitute. y2 is 2 minus y1 is 18 divided by x2 is 5 minus x1 is negative 3. And then we simplify. 2 minus 18 is negative 16 divided by 5 minus a negative 8. We can add the opposite, so that's just 8. And we can simplify that. Negative 16 divided by 8 is negative 2. So our slope is negative 2. What is the value of x? In x squared plus 12x plus 36 equals 0. We need to find what number we could substitute for x that would make this equation true. And there's more than one way to do this. One way would be to use the quadratic equation, which is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. And the a, b, and c, those are just the coefficients of your, a is the coefficient of your x squared term, b is the coefficient of your x term, and the c is your constant. But there is another way to solve this that may even be a little bit easier than using the quadratic equation, and that is to factor. So I'm going to factor this trinomial into a binomial times a binomial. I know that x times x is x squared. What I need to find out is what my second numbers are in each set of parentheses. And these two numbers need to have a product of 36 and a sum of 12. And the only two numbers that have a product of 36 and a sum of 12 are 6 and 6. And you can always FOIL what you factored to check and see if it is in fact correct. So you could multiply x times x, and that's x squared. That's your first terms. Outer x times 6, 6x. Inner 6 times x, 6x. And last, 6 times 6, 36. Then you combine like terms, x squared plus 12x plus 36. And we can see that we did factor correctly, because whenever I FOILed my binomials back out, I got what I started with. So now what we have is that some number times another number is 0. And the only way you can multiply numbers together and get 0 is if at least one of your numbers is 0. That means that either this number, x plus 6, has to be 0, or this number, x plus 6, has to be 0. And now we just need to solve our equations. To solve for x, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So we have x equals negative 6. Or, again, to solve for x, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So we have x equals negative 6. That means that x is either negative 6 or it's negative 6. And you can substitute that solution back in for x and check to see that it really does work. So that's negative 6 squared plus 12 times negative 6 plus 36. And what I want to know is, does that equal 0? Negative 6 squared, a negative 6 times a negative 6 is 36, plus 12 times negative 6 is negative 72, plus 36. And again, I want to know if that equals 0. 36 and 36 is 72, plus negative 72. And I need to know if that equals 0. 72 plus a negative 72 is in fact 0. 0 does equal 0. So we can see that we solved our equation correctly. We found the value of x, negative 6. If x minus 9 equals 2x plus 10, what is the value of x? To solve for x, the first thing we need to do is get all of our x terms on the same side of the equal sign. And we can do that two different ways. One is we could subtract x from both sides, which would eliminate x from the left side. Or we could subtract 2x from both sides, which would eliminate 2x from the right side. I prefer subtracting x from both sides. X minus x is 0. They cancel because they're additive inverses of each other. So on the left side, we're left with negative 9. We bring down our equal sign. Then we have 2x minus x, which gives us simply x. Sometimes people think that 2x minus x would be 2. But you have to think about what you're really doing. I always like to relate things to money. So if you had $2 and I took away $1 from you, then you would still have $1 left. That dollar wouldn't magically turn into something else. It's still $1. So 2x minus x, we still have an x left, plus 10. To get x by itself, we need to get rid of this plus 10. So the opposite of adding 10 is subtracting 10. So subtract 10 from both sides. Negative 9 and negative 10 is negative 19. Bring down the equal sign, and we have our x. Plus 10 and a negative 10 cancels. They're additive inverses of each other. So we get that x equals negative 19, or A. On a 6-sided die, each side has a number between 1 and 6. What is the probability of throwing a 3 or a 4? This die has 6 sides, so that means our total is 6, which is the denominator of our fraction for finding our probability. We want to know what the probability of throwing a 3 or, and that is a key word, 3 or a 4. So if it lands on either one of those, we're good. So that's 2 different numbers that we could land on out of our 6 different numbers. And then of course we can simplify our fraction by dividing the numerator and the denominator both by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 6 divided by 2 is 3, so it's 1 in 3. Or, written like this, a 1 in 3 chance. If 25% of x is 250, what is the value of x? We're going to start by decoding this sentence. We're going to translate it into a math equation. It says 25% of x. And this word of tells us to multiply. So I'm going to put a little multiplication dot above it. So we're going to multiply 25% and x. Is a very important word in math because is an equal sign. So wherever you see that word is, you can put an equal sign there. And now we can take this and write our equation. So 25% times x, we have to take our percent and change it into a decimal. So 25%, the decimal's behind it, and you move it 2 places to the left to change a percent into a decimal. So that's 25 hundredths times x, or just 25 hundredths x, is or equals 250. Now that we've written our equation, we just need to solve. So this is 25 hundredths times x. To solve for x, we do the opposite of multiplying, and we divide both sides by 25 hundredths. So 25 hundredths divided by 25 hundredths is 1, and 1 times x is simply x. So those cancel out. We bring down the equal sign, and if you have a calculator, of course you can divide that in a calculator, but I'm going to work it out off to the side. So we have 250 divided by 25 hundredths. We can't divide by a decimal, so we need to move the decimal 2 places to the right, which means we do the same with our number under our division sign. So we have to add 2 zeros to it. And now we can divide. 25 goes into 25 one time. 25 times 1 is 25, and we subtract and get 0. We bring down a 0, and 25 goes into 0 times. And that's going to keep happening for each one of these zeros. We're going to keep bringing down zeros, and we're going to keep getting zeros. So we end up with x is 1,000. Now, if that's a little confusing to you, you can do it one other way. So you can rewrite this as 250 divided by, And then 25 hundredths is 1/4. So it's 250 divided by 1/4, which still might look a little confusing, but we can even rewrite that to 250 divided by 1/4. And then we can copy, change, flip. We can copy 250, change division to multiplication, and flip 1/4 to be 4. 250 times 4 is 1,000, which is the same thing we got when we divided with our decimal. So either way, the answer is 1,000. And if you put that back into the sentence, it makes sense. 25% of 1,000 is 250. What is the value of 6 factorial? What 6 factorial means is 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And so since we're just multiplying a series of numbers, you can multiply them in any order you want. So you can take any 2 numbers and multiply those together first, and then continue multiplying. But I'll just multiply them in order. So we have 6 times 5, which is 30, times 4, times 3, times 2, times 1. Then we can multiply 30 times 4. We have 30, 60, 90, 120. So 30 times 4 is 120, times 3 times 2 times 1. Then 120 times 3, 120 times 3. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. So 360 times 2 times 1. And 360 times 2. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 6 is 12, carry the 1. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So 720 times 1, and 720 times 1 is just 720. So 6 factorial is equal to 720. Answer C. In the following equation, solve for x by factoring. 2x squared minus 7x equals x squared minus 12. In order to factor, we need to get all of our terms on the same side. So that means subtracting an x squared from both sides so that we have x squared now minus 7x, and then adding 12 to both sides. So now this is plus 12 equals 0. Now we're ready to factor. So I have a binomial, and a binomial equals 0. I know my first 2 terms are going to be, or my first term in each binomial, because x times x gives me x squared. To find these second numbers in each binomial, these numbers must be factors of 12 that add to be negative 7. Let's start by looking at the factors of 12. 1 and 12 are factors of 12. 2 and 6 are factors of 12. And also 3 and 4 are factors of 12. Now again, these numbers have to add to give us a negative 7, while also multiplying to give us a positive 12. The only way these numbers can do both those things is if they're both negative. Because a negative times a negative will give us the positive 12, but when we add the 2 negatives together, we'll get our negative 7. So negative 1 and negative 12, that's negative 13, not negative 7. Doesn't work. Negative 2 and negative 6 is negative 8, not negative 7. Doesn't work. But negative 3 and negative 4 does give me negative 7. So I found my numbers, negative 3 and negative 4. And then if you just FOIL, you can check your answer to see if it's correct. So we do first times first, x times x, x squared. Outer, x times negative 4 is negative 4x. Then the inner, negative 3 times x, negative 3x. So you have negative 4x plus negative 3x, which is the middle term, negative 7x. And then finally the last, negative 3 times negative 4, which is a positive 12. So now we've checked and we know that we factored correctly. But we still haven't solved for x. Here we have two expressions that we're multiplying together, and that gives us 0. The only way you can multiply two numbers together and get 0 is if one of them is 0. So that means that either x minus 3 must be 0 or x minus 4 must be 0. And now we just solve each equation. So add 3 and 3. Those cancel because they're additive inverses, and x equals 3. Or add 4 and add 4, and those cancel because they're additive inverses, and x equals 4. So that means x equals 3 and 4, which is answer B. The length of a square is 15 centimeters. What is its area? Well, a square is a type of rectangle. And the formula for area of a rectangle is area equals the length times the width, or base times height. But what's special about a square is that its length and width are the same. So if we're told that the length is 15 centimeters, then that means the width is 15 centimeters as well. So we substitute 15 centimeters for the length and 15 centimeters for the width. So 15 times 15. 15 times 15, can multiply that out over here. 5 times 5 is 25. Write the 5, carry the 2. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7. Get rid of that, put your 0 placeholder. 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 1 is 1. And we add these up. 5 and 0 is 5. 7 plus 5 is 12. Write the 2, carry the 1. And 1 plus 1 is 2. So 15 times 15 is 225. And centimeters times centimeters is centimeters squared. So the area of a square with length 15 centimeters is 225 centimeters squared, which is answer choice D. Simplify the following expression. 2x to the 4th, y to the 7th, m squared, z times 5x squared, y cubed, m to the 8th. I'm going to start by multiplying my like terms together. So I can rewrite this. It's multiplication, so you can multiply in any order you want. So I'm going to multiply 2 times 5 together. And then I've got this x to the 4th times the x squared. And then we have y to the 7th times y cubed. And then we have m squared times m to the 8th. And then finally we just have this z, so times z. And now we'll simplify each one of these. So 2 times 5 is 10. And so right now you could already eliminate answer choice B because we're multiplying. We're not adding 2 and 5 together, we're multiplying. And then we get to our x's, x to the 4th times x squared. And what that really is, x to the 4th means x times itself 4 times. while x squared means x times itself 2 times. So when we multiply x to the 4th times x squared, we're multiplying x times itself a total of 6 times. So it's x to the 6th. You can see what we end up doing is adding those exponents together. And it's the same thing with y to the 7th times y cubed. Let's look at that one a little differently. So y to the 7th times y cubed. Y to the 7th is y times itself 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times y cubed. So times 1, 2, 3. So what we end up with is y times itself a total of 10 times. So y to the 7th times y cubed is y to the 10th. Or again, we're adding those exponents. Then we have m squared times m to the 8th. So same concept. Again, we're going to add our exponents. And we get m to the 10th. And then finally, times z. So that means our answer is D. 10, x to the 6th, y to the 10th, m to the 10th, z.